Hello and welcome to my latest tutorial. So this time we're going to talk about the Octane render plugin for Blender. So some of you might know that there's such a thing as the render engine called Octane, and they have a couple of plugins, and they also have a standalone version. So this is a GPU render that will make use of your GPU for rendering, and therefore is pretty fast, just like for example, Cycles does in Blender. And they have a couple of plugins, like I said, for most of the big 3D packages. And they also have a standalone version where you can load in your OBJ or FBX or VDB files, and then you can assemble and build materials and render out your scene. But of course, we love Blender. We want to stay in Blender as long as possible and make use of its tools, and then just use Octane for the rendering part and the shaders. So the good thing is that there is also a free version out there. It can be a bit confusing to find, so I have all the links in a separate text file for you, so you don't need to like zoom in and check everything. And if you go to the website, which is home.autoy.com, but again, I have the links all in that text file. You see there's you can actually rent it, and then there's an enterprise and a studio. So that's the main thing you need to know. So there's a link to the Prime version. It's called Prime. And also to note is that Octane render is not for Blender is not a plugin that you can plug into any version of Blender, but you have to download two parts: the download Blender Octane render edition, which is currently based on 2.83.6. So there's currently no 2.9 version, but that will come later on. They're usually pretty fast with updating these. So this one is from September 20th. And then you also need to download the Octane server Prime. The Prime is the free tier one, and it's actually fully featured, but the limitation is that you can only use one GPU for rendering. So even though you have like, I don't know, 4 in your machine, you will only be able to render with one. So if you are totally convinced that you want to jump in on Octane, then you also have two other options which are paid. So on autoy.com you can go to shop and then to rent, and then here you can see that there is a annual subscription and a monthly subscription. So if you want the enterprise, which is the full featured everything used, 50 GPUs and render sleeves and whatnot, then you can do that for 30 euros a month. Or they also have a studio version which limits it to 2 GPUs for 20 euros a month. So, but again, the free tier is fully featured. So you don't lose anything just by using that one. The latest update for that free tier usually comes a few days after the studio and enterprise versions are released. So you might have to wait a little bit, but that usually is fine. And you can see all the other plugins and the standalone are also included with that. And even Octane X for the Mac and Embergen FX, which we'll get to maybe in another video. But so you can choose whatever you want here, free, studio or enterprise, and purchase that, or use the free one. Again, I'll put the links in and you need to download these. You can get the enterprise version through the forum. Again, the link is there in the link text file. One curiosity about the Studio Edition is that there's like a little bit of fine print once you click into here, and it says the Studio version is available from the download section in the customer account page. So once you subscribed, if you choose to the Studio, then you will be able to find it in your download section. But so you've done that, and then you have the files. I mean, of course, you shouldn't have 4 files, you're just going to have 2, but just to illustrate here, you have the Blender Octane edition, which is actually the same regardless if you have Prime, Studio, or Enterprise. And then depending on which tier you have, if the free tier, then you use just this one, Studio and Enterprise. You need to use the version specific to your plan that you have. And then you install both of them. So don't worry that I'm on a Mac here. I'm just for illustration purposes, and I'm going to switch to the PC in a second. So you install both of these, and then you're good to go. I know one thing I wanted to say before we start and before you guys write to me, there is a thing called the Octane helper add-on which you can install. However, I could not get it to work. It's supposed to make the import of stuff like Megascan textures from Bridge automatic, but I honestly couldn't get it to work. I tried many times. Maybe some of you have an idea of how that's supposed to work, but for me, whenever I imported it from Bridge, it just had no image textures attached at all. So I'll show you a different workaround with how I deal with it. And I know there's going to be many questions, and I'm going to not cover every single node of Octane. I won't do that. This is not a be-all, end-all tutorial for everything inside Octane. So I'm sure there's plenty of you out there who know this tool way better than I do, or have more experience in other plugins or standalone. So I'm gonna really go through through an introduction, right? Of the materials, shaders, and other settings that I find useful, that I use on a daily basis. It's also not going to be a complete scene assembly for the entire scene, because again, this is about Octane only, which is pretty much the shading, materials, and lighting and rendering process. So I'm going to focus on these things. And again, this is very concept design focused. I'm not making final animations for export into Nuke or After Effects. I don't have any knowledge in these areas. So this is going to be purely based on a still image concept design workflow with, if you want, minor adjustments in Photoshop. But we'll see about that. So let's get going. So let's get started. I've opened the Blender Octane edition, and I also installed and are running the server. So you can see here's the Octane Server Studio and the Blender Octane edition. And you can check that it's running by seeing it here in the system tray. The first time you do it, you probably have to log in. So you need to make an account with Otoy, but that's free. And then you can log in and use the whatever version you have, Prime, Studio, or Enterprise, just like I just introduced to you. So if maybe this, the biggest change here is that under Render Engine, you actually have Octane here. The rest is pretty much the same as the usual Blender 2.83.6 or whatever version you have. And if for some reason it doesn't show up, then search for Octane in the add-on directory, in the settings, in the preferences, and enable this. But it should be enabled by default. So what's really different here? It's pretty standard Blender, and I opened a new scene here, and I have still the old material added. This is still the Eevee Blender material, but we'll get to the new stuff in a second. I just wanted to give you like a quick overview. So the only thing that's really different is here the Octane panel, and you can see that you can choose that here. You also have a lot of stuff that might be maybe confusing: kernel types, clay modes, whatever, lots of quality settings, and it goes down and down and down and down. So don't worry about all of this for now. We're also not gonna use a lot of this kind of stuff. we're only gonna get into that later, or we don't need it at all. So one thing you wanted to check is that under here, when you scroll all the way down, you can check device preferences, and it might pop up, or it's going to blink here, and then you can access it, and you can see your graphic cards, and so both of mine are correctly recognized. You wanna, if you have an RTX card, so from the 20 or 30 generation, then you should enable the RTX acceleration. If it's not already enabled, it can make quite a big difference in render speeds. So for now we can close that to make sure everything is properly recognized, and then we're just gonna go on top here. And for now we don't really need to concern ourselves with any of this. We're gonna switch to some different settings later on when we're really trying to do a final render. But for now, let's just have a look at some really basic material setups. Let's first of all turn on Octane. So for that, we'll just click up here, just like we would enable Eevee or Cycles the same way. Let's give it a second. And here we are already. Looks a bit blown out, but that is fine. In order for it maybe to have a bit more contrast and so that we can really see what's going on, let's switch to the world setting. And you will see here there's a nasty bit of a mess here. Let me make this a bit bigger so you guys can see better. So we have a world output, and it's pretty much the same as usual. We have actually a background here plugged in, but as you see, this doesn't do anything because this is mainly for the output for Eevee. So we can actually just change back to Eevee here, and then we have our usual settings here, and you can see how we can influence that. But the Octane environment plug here doesn't affect this one, of course. So we'll switch back to Octane, and you will see that these Octane and Eevee doesn't share any shaders, any nodes, so we have to actually make a completely new set, which also means that we can't really work in Eevee for previs and then switch to Octane like we would maybe do with Eevee and Cycles. But we have to kind of commit to Octane right from the beginning, which can be maybe a bit cumbersome because in larger scenes it's of course not going to be as quick or real time as Eevee. But that's okay. It's not really a comparison video between Eevee and Octane, or Cycles and Octane. I'll give my final thoughts about this topic at the end of this tutorial, after you kind of see what we're dealing with here, so you get a better idea. In any case, let's make this a bit less whitish, blown out. So you see that we have the daylight environment and we have a sun direction already plugged in. This is already by standard. You don't really need to do anything. Currently the local time is 1400 hours, 2 p.m. So we can go a bit earlier. It doesn't really match the exact numbers. I mean, it's not 4 a.m. right now, right? So it doesn't really work like that. For some reason, maybe they should change that. I don't know. But for now, I also have a light in here. I don't want to have that. So you can play with that a little bit, and you can reduce the power of the environment. The sun size we can enable or change. So, and that's all for now. You can see here's the sun, and then we can make it huge if you want. So for now, let's leave it at something that is a bit more contrasty. We can also plug in an HDRI if we want to, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's first look at an object here. So right now we have one object that doesn't have anything, and we have one object that has an old shader from Eevee, which is probably the two most common scenarios that you will encounter. So if you make a new material, you will see that if you click on new, you're going to have this massive thing here, which is the universal material. Has a lot of plugs, but don't worry, we won't need most of them. There are, of course, other ones. If you actually hit Shift A and you search for material, then you have like a, well, let's actually not search, but let's go into Octane shader. You have diffuse, glossy, specular, mix, a lot of different things, tune, metal, universal. But I mean, the universal one really gives you the most options, and pretty much all options you'll ever need. And you can see that by just purely clicking on new and having a new material, which we can call ground or whatever, you immediately get, it sets up a specular 1 and roughness 0.063, which makes it a very reflective material. And you can also see that we have now another option here. We can choose all, or we can choose only Octane. But since they don't share the shaders, we can just leave it at Octane for now. And so now we have that. We can now start to plug in maybe a image. So you will find that under Octane texture and under image texture, or you can just search for image. And again, don't get confused by all these options. There is a lot of options there, which means it's a very powerful render engine. You can go very, very deep. But again, this is not the ultimate resource for every Octane option ever made in the history of rendering. This is just an introduction. So we can connect the out texture to the albedo color. And right now I don't have anything. I mean, we can also, if you cut this off and you just want to change the color, we can do that here. Or you can also plug in an RGB spectrum texture, which is, again, a way to control the color. We don't need this. Again, the nodes behave just like any other way it would in Blender. So you can Shift D and copy, and you can cut them with holding Control, right mouse click. So if you connect these and you hold on the Control key and you swipe, you hold the right mouse button, just in case for some people who don't know that. In any case, we have an image texture here. So let's plug that in. Let's open a texture. Let's plug in my favorite texture that I use all the time. So now we have a texture applied. We have power, gamma. What does all this mean, right? So I mean, power is very simple of how strong this texture will come through. We also have an invert button, and the gamma we can apply. So another thing is what I'm always trying to figure out is, of course, standard box mapping. So you can, for that, you can go into Shift A, add Octane projection, box projection. Very straightforward. It's a bit easier actually than it is named in Eevee. So you can plug that in here, and then we have a box projected texture. We can also change that to world space. And then we also want to have some controls for the transformation. So that is under Octane Transform. So if you just have a plane, a 2D kind of plane, just like this, you can use the Octane Transform, Scale Transform. You can plug that in. and you can scale it up or down. For more control over it, you can also add the there's a full transform, which has kind of everything in X, Y, and Z, or you can also use the 3D transform. And now we can scale it. Or you can also just scale it in one direction, just like any other way. So that's our basic setup for a box projection. And if you want to make any adjustments, there is something called the, I think it's, bloody hell, where is it? The color correction texture. So if you just drop it in, it actually makes a mistake. It plugs the texture into the invert plugin. I have no idea why it does that. So that's maybe an error. Of course, it should go into the texture plug. So that's just something you have to manually fix, unfortunately. But for now, you can change the brightness here, hue. It's kind of like what Eevee has, of course, but it's kind of all together, because for Eevee you have to have like a separate hue and saturation, a separate gamma, a separate brightness and contrast. Here you have everything in basically one node, which is great. There's also a node that kind of is similar to the color ramp, which is called the gradient texture. So we can plug that in here. Let's get rid of the color correction for once. Of course, you can see that it will become black and white. So the output here is black and white, but it basically has the same function. Let's make this a bit bigger so you can see. It basically has the same function to up the contrast or invert the colors. So that is the usual gradient texture that we have. So we can use that in, for example, the roughness channel. You can kind of see something's happening. And when we play with the contrast, basically, we can achieve different reflection levels. Maybe the albedo color should be a bit darker so we can actually see what's going on. So you can see when we play around with this, then we get very nice reflections here. So that is basically how we apply a simple image-based texture. Now, again, we have the same stuff as usual. We have the albedo color, which is kind of the solid color image texture. Then we have specular, specularity, roughness, metallic. These are like the ones we always need and always use, at least for my stuff. And then we have a whole slew of other stuff that allows you an incredible amount of control. But again, we're not gonna necessarily work with that right now. There's also a bump map down here. So you have your bump, your normal, and your displacement here. And you also have your emission here. So for the gradient, we can also put that into the bump. We don't need any extra in between here. And there's also a displacement. We'll get to that in a second. But now we have here the bump, and we also have an emission. An emission you can't necessarily, you shouldn't plug in directly, but there's basically two types of emissions. A black body emission, which just is kind of a straightforward kind of emission here, and we can really pump it up, and now it's all bright. And there's also something called a texture emission. It's actually the same. Is it the same? No. But we can plug in, for example, this texture as well, because why not? It doesn't make any sense. And we can bump up the power, and then you can see how it's all nice and glowy. But of course, that's really ugly here. We don't need that. So a lot of you asked about displacements, and I wanted to do a quick overview over how that works here. So if you know from Eevee, you have a displacement port here in the material output right away, and you have to enable it in the shader, but not here. Here it's right in the universal shader material setup. There's a thing called displacement. So you can try to search for it here. I have no idea where it is, to be honest. Let's look for it. Where could it be? Tool? Oh, here, tool. Okay, it's under tool, or you just search for it. In any case, you have basically two different ones, texture displacement and vertex displacement. Let's take a look at both of these. So let's click on texture displacement first. You have a couple of options. You don't really need to care about anything other than the size here, the pixel size. So if you have a really high resolution texture map, then use the according 4K, 8K kind of level of detail. If you plug it in, of course, nothing's going to happen because it doesn't have a texture yet. What is it here? Box Gaussian? Oh, whatever. Let's click on this, put this in here. Nothing happens because, of course, we don't have enough height yet. So let's add height to it. You can see that even with this plane, which is one polygon, we're getting a crazy amount of displacement right away, and it's really fast. So if we increase it further, you can see how it really goes crazy. And we have an insane amount. This could be like, I don't know, a city or whatever, right? Like insane amount of detail right away. So the major problem with the texture with this method is that the box mapping does not work. So if you now scale it up, you can see that nothing's happening, or something is happening, but you can't really tell what, because the box projection only affects the roughness in this case. The roughness can be scaled up or down with box projection, but not the displacement. Now what you can do is, if because it uses just a UV map of that object, which is, when you use a primitive, is pretty straightforward. Like we can also use this one. If you change to ground, you can see it's doing something, right? So it's like displacing like crazy. But again, we can't change anything. We can't change the projection method on this cube or anything, which leads to the effect that you can see here the scaling is different here than it is on here. Here is a lot smaller than it is on here, because we can't force them to use world coordinates, which is a bit unfortunate. But in any case, you can see if you go to 4K, it has a bit better resolution here, of course, but it gets slower. So this is all cool. Now what we can do, if you like the if you have a UV map for the object you're trying to use, or you use like some like straightforward boxes or whatever, you can just use that transform and plug it directly into the transform of the texture, and then you get control over the scaling of this. Again, it's not equal here. It just scales the UV map thing up and down, so the relative difference between these two is still there. Again, that's the limitation of this method. I mean, it can still give you super cool abstract kind of ideas, and if you have UV maps for your objects, then it's great. Then you can use this. But you can't just slap this on everything and then expect like instantly crazy results. So let's get rid of this one for now and add the vertex displacement, the other displacement type. So If you plug this in now into the texture, you won't see anything. And if you up the height, you won't see anything. The entire map moves up and down. So the reason is that we need actually, for this type to work, we need to have the subdivision again, like we have in Eevee. So we can try to use that for this plane and go into edit mode with tab and right click, say subdivide, subdivide, subdivide a couple of times. And you can see how something is happening. Now, on top of that, there is actually a subdivision level adjustment inside the displacement node. So you can click on that and you can, on top of the displacement that you have here, you can add that. It's not a modifier, it's something within the displacement node itself. So you can go a bit crazy here, and it goes up to level, I think it goes up to level 6, and now you can see like how there's craziness happening here. Let's lower the level, and now you can see that it gets really slow. But the benefit is that now we actually have the box mapping with world coordinates applied. So you gain that flexibility, but of course you use that crazy fast updating from the map before, from the texture displacement from Octane. So that is kind of the gist of it, and you can use that however you see fit. Again, the most flexibility and speed you're going to get through the standalone. Where you can stack these displacements and stuff like that, but for now, this is kind of what we have in Blender, and it's pretty good. It's basically on par with the standalone in general. Of course, the complete nodal interface in the standalone that lets you even mix geometries and all sorts of things together is a tad more powerful, but of course it comes at the expense of not being able to have a complete have Blender there, right? So that's why we're here in Blender using the plugin. So it does offer a benefit, I think, more options over Eevee and Cycles. Of course, Eevee doesn't have any displacement at all, but I think also the quality and the speed, depending on which option you go for, is superior to Cycles, and I think it gives nicer results. And of course, the added option of the subdivision level in here is, of course, also great. So that's it for the displacement. Let's move on to another little subject. So let's have a little look at what happens when we want to use an existing material, but we have to kind of convert it into an Octane material. So the good news is that if you have a material just with Eevee as usual, or Cycles, if you scroll into the material tab here in the material properties and you go down to below the settings, there's a thing called converters, and it says convert to Octane materials. So this is something built into Octane, into the Octane plugin right now. And if you click on it, boom, it has it converted. It does some funky things with putting a texture emission into the emission, which is not ideal. So I usually get rid of that. But in any case, the good news is that there is a converter. Let's go back and reconvert it. The bad news is that it can't deal with very complex shader setups, or actually it can't really deal with anything besides no, that's not what I want. In order to actually add a different, sorry for the slight detour, in order to add a material, an Eevee material or Cycles material, you need to actually switch back from Octane to Eevee, because in here now it shows only the Octane materials. So I'll do that for example's sake, and you can see here that in Eevee right now, like it can't read the shader from Octane, of course. So if I just quickly add an image texture, plug that in, open whatever texture I have, and we have that here now. It will convert this without any problems. But let's make some examples and see what it really converts. So if we have something in the roughness channel, let's say we have another one in the specularity channel, but we change that with let's add a color ramp into it, and just see, like, let's build a little shader and let's see what it actually can deal with and where it craps out. So we have that. It doesn't even matter what effect it has on the texture here. I just want to give an example. So if we add our vector transform, our like the usual setup we always do. So let's add that just to 1. Let's add our usual box map up setting and see what it does. So we have basically 3 types of textures that I always use. Again, I'm going from my perspective here. So one is an image texture with the box mapping applied. There's a texture that is directly plugged in, or a texture that has something plugged in between. So now we will see what this really does. So we, of course, here the converter is not here because stupid me, I'm in Eevee. So if we go to Octane, and now we have this whole setup here, we go to material and we try to convert this material to Octane. Let's see what it does. Okay, not much. That is not good, but that's unfortunately kind of the current state of it. So what has happened here, again, we have this weird texture emission which we don't need. Get rid of it with X. And so you saw it has kind of gotten rid of the box mapping, which we kind of have to then do ourselves again. But luckily enough, we can just copy paste, Control C, Control V, that in there. And also for this one, it got rid of our specularity. So whenever there is something in between the image node and the plug here for the material, then it won't recognize it and it just gets rid of it. That comes in when we sometimes import or prep Megascan assets or other kind of assets where we have to keep this in mind. So we have to basically make sure that the image texture is directly plugged in if you want to convert anything, and then kind of redo a little bit of the work. That is just currently unfortunate limitation, and a lot of people will say like, oh, so this makes it really cumbersome to work with it. But like I said in the beginning, I think if you want to really look into Octane, then it will require a little bit of rework, and it will also require you to kind of commit to it for whatever scene that you're trying to do. But again, I'll get to my thoughts about this at a later point in this tutorial. But I want to just focus more or less on the technicalities for now. Again, I don't want to say it's good or bad that this is the way it is, because every plugin, you know, that you're going to use, whether you use like V-Ray in Maya, or if you use Redshift in Cinema 4D or anything, they all have their specific render setups. And so like if you have a material, for example, in Redshift, like you have to convert it into a material for Octane, for example, that like they both of them can't talk to each other. They use different kinds of languages, so to speak. So you will face that issue again and again. But it is what it is. For me, Octane has a lot of benefits. But like I said, I'll get into that later. So move on. Let's move on to the next thing. So a couple of other things I want to show you: how to deal with imported objects, and also how to deal with some of my most commonly used things. So let's first look at one that I use all the time, which is image as planes. If you use that here, you get the image, you get the error message: cannot generate materials for unknown Octane render engine. So no luck there. So we have to do this tiny workaround, which I understand can be annoying, but it is what it is. So let's go to Eevee in the render engine's settings and do the same thing again. Images planes. Choose any image. You can scale it up a bit. And there we have it. So it works fine. If you go to Octane, it doesn't show up, of course. So now we need to go to convert to Octane materials and get rid of this emission thing. So here you have it, and then you can play around with it and do your usual thing that you do with it. So again, a little workaround is needed. Another stuff is if you want to, for example, import a character, any OBJ. I'll take a second. So here we have our character, but of course he has no materials plugged in. So here we need to find our image textures and plug those in manually, of course. So I'll just try to find the color image, give it a second to load. I probably chose the 16K image, which was not very smart. Let's choose something a bit smaller. Okay, it's super shiny. We don't want that. So, and then here, I mean, you have your normal character. And what else could we do? We could, for example, see how Octane works with VDB files. So if in case we're gonna want to have a bit of fog. So of course you can use the fog settings in the world settings, in the world preferences. So I'll get to that when I talk about the world settings in general. But if we want to, for example, bring in a VDB file as a localized kind of fog, so we can do that. I've just used like a VDB file I have here, and you can see it shows up right away. I can scale it up a little bit. And of course it's fantastically black. Let's select it, and if you click on new, you automatically get a volume medium node from Octane. We want to maybe change the scattering, and we need to really dial down the density of this. Let's dial it down to like maybe 0.01, or let's see how that influences 0.1. You can see it it gets pretty quickly pretty dense, so we need to keep it really low. And you see here we have our VDB file. So one thing we can do with the volumes as well, because this one looks like that, but we can also go to the settings here, to the render settings, the render properties, and if you scroll down to here, compatibility settings, there's a thing called emulate old volume behavior. If you do that, you get I think it almost looks a bit nicer, this kind of cloud here. And then you don't get this like crazy blackish thing. No, but here you have a very nice looking cloud. So that's how you can work with VDBs. And something else that we of course always use is like maybe, for example, megascans. So again, I've mentioned this little plugin in the beginning called the Octane helper, and it's supposed to help you import megascan assets and make them immediately compatible with all the shaders set up and everything, but I couldn't get it to work. So again, I couldn't get it to work, so I don't want to necessarily recommend it to you guys. I've seen some other people who got it to work, and maybe there is something I'm doing wrong, so please let me know and reach out to me. But maybe for the sake of this tutorial, it's actually better that it doesn't work, so you kind of need to kind of learn how to use it anyway from the ground up. But let's for example do the workaround that I use. So the problem is that when you import anything, if you import a surface or if you import a asset, that it would just have the basic universal shader but no images plugged in. That's the error I'm getting. So that is of course not very helpful, because then you need to navigate to your location in your hard drive, and then you have to put in all the image textures in manually. So I mean, what I would recommend doing if you also can't get the plugin to work, simply switch to Eevee again, kind of do the same as we did before with the images as planes, and then you can, for example, click on your map that you want, and then we'll say export to Blender, and then we have maybe we'll apply it to here, the raw granite. Okay, so here it shows up now, of course, and we have everything in here. Now we need to kind of remember what we saw before, the kind of conversion behavior. That means we have to take out and prep this a little bit for it to properly convert. So anything where the image map is not directly plugged into the shader will not work. So I'll get rid of this. And here as well, we kind of let's just plug in the bump into the depends on if you want to have the bump or the normal. Let me get rid of those. So you kind of need to make it really simple. And you have to kind of rebuild it later if you really want to use it that way. But let's switch to Octane, and nothing, of course, should show up. So let's go into our conversion. And convert our material, and then it will work a bit better. So now, of course, we still haven't really gotten our box projection, so we need to do that again. And we need also our scale. Or let's do a 3D transform, whatever. So we plug that into the projection. And again, yeah, there is a certain amount of like setting up, redoing the work. So now there is this texture applied here. So that's kind of how we have to deal with this. And the other for example, a regular acid is kind of the same way in that sense. So if we go back to Eevee again, so maybe it's good to do all your importing kind of in the beginning. Maybe, I don't know. Let's just use anything here. Let's use this curb. So we have that here with the correct materials. Of course, there's the bump or normal map. Let's plug in the normal map into the normal here to make it simple. Switch to Octane. I think there's still a bump map in the normal. You don't want that. But so now, in order to get this, again, let's go to the converter. Let's let it update. Let's get rid of the emission. And we kind of have our material here. And then we can play with that. Of course, for these objects, they're already UV mapped, so we don't have to worry about the box projection. That's just more for the material, for the surface materials, for the surfaces. So yeah, so that's basically all about the importing of objects, working with mega scans, using VDB files, images as planes. And I want to jump a little bit into the world setup. So let's start looking at the world settings. And there's a couple of different things we should take a look at. And so first of all, I think I showed it a little bit before, but basically when you go into the world tab here, you have this already set up for you. So we have the daylight environment, sun direction, and this is plugged into the Octane environment. If we want to play around with this, we can change the local time here, or midday kind of feeling towards evening. And then with the north offset, you can change the basically the rotation here, so you can really have full control over your shadows. And you can change the sun size, you can change sky color, sunset color. You also have some different settings here. So you can drop down, you have different daylight models. So it's just a different way how this is calculated, and you can choose whichever one suits you best. I don't know if there's necessarily oh, this is the best one, or this is not so good for whatever reason. I mean, I just use whatever looks best. So we have that to play around with. You can play with the power and the sun size. I already mentioned that. So, but there's another thing which is here, the visible environment and the environment. So what does that mean? So basically right now we have a daylight environment that is plugged into the Octane environment, and that kind of takes care of everything, of the lighting, of the reflections and the backdrop and everything. But we could also do something like duplicate that, Shift D, and then plug this into the Octane visible environment. But now it's really not doing anything. So we need to actually go down here and say visible environment backplate. If you enable that and you change the local time, you can see how the background actually changes, but none of our objects seem to be affected by that change. And that's because it's exactly what this is supposed to do. So it gives you creative control over having a different backdrop, but still full control over your lighting scenario. So if I change this one here, I mean, of course, right now it's very harsh, the difference, and it doesn't match. but it's just for illustration purposes, right? So I can change this here, dial in exactly the shadows and time of day I want, and then I have that. Or I can also enable the reflections and refractions so that I can actually use this for, I mean, it is what I said. I have the backplate, I have the reflections and refractions driven by this visible environment, but the overall lighting is driven by the environment plugged into the Octane environment tab. So I can also do, you can change here to the world properties and then select texture environment. So I have a texture now in here. And then, for example, I can say image texture and plug in HDRI, whatever I feel like. Give it a second to load. It's an 8K or 16K image after all. Come on. So now I have the visible environment driving kind of the, okay, why is it not working? Okay, I need to just restart. I have the visible environment being driven by an HDRI, so you can see that here. I just enabled the visible backplate, and you can see now I have, now I could potentially, like, because maybe I like this area of the clouds a lot, but I want to fake the sunlight a little bit. I wanted to have it come from a slightly different angle because it looks nicer in terms of my composition. Of course, again, this doesn't match at all, but that's not the point. It's a bit blown out. Maybe we need to change the gamma a bit. Sometimes there's some issues with the overall lighting and what looks good, and we don't want to make it blown out. So usually try to figure out a mix between the gamma and the power for it to look nice in the backdrop. And then again, like with the other one, you can have the HDRI drive the reflections and the refractions, and in this case it kind of gives a bit better of a blend between these two. So we get some reflections from the HDRI to have our characters sit in the whole scene a bit better, and you can see turning on and off how you can now see the reflections of the clouds in the surfaces. But I still have full control over my shadows and light direction. So even though it's overcast, I can still get hard shadows. Again, I would say it's mostly a creative tool that we can use. So now another thing we of course want to look at is, let me get rid of this, is the fog settings. So how do we do like an environment fog? For that we go to somewhere called the Octane medium. You can use the volume medium and plug that into the medium setting here, and boom, it's all black. So now we need to play around with the settings a bit, and for that we need to really dial down the density, maybe a bit too much, but you're gonna be in that range. We also want to up the medium, and now you can see that I mean, depending on your scene, you will have different values. Well, first of all, you can see the performance hit of using this kind of environment fog. And so you will have to find a happy medium between the medium radius and also the density. So if we up the medium by a lot, you will get this kind of result. And let's see if we can make it a bit thicker. So you can see that most of the changes in the medium will happen between 20 to 50, because now I have the block already disappearing, but at 20 it's still kind of recognizable. So you have to find whatever works for your scene, because in a different scene with a different scale, there will be different settings that you will need. I just want to have a few objects receding into the distance so you can kind of see the effect that this has. Let me turn this off so you can see better. You can see we have something closer to camera and something further away. So you see how the quality of the fog is very different with different kinds of settings. But at this level, like even cranking up the medium to something insane, it will not have any effect. So I'm just playing around with some of the settings here, and then you can arrive at something that is fairly usable, I think, and can make some good looking fog. I just wanted to check if the old volume behavior is still enabled, but I guess it doesn't matter for this one. Also, now we can start looking at some of the other settings that we have in the render settings. So usually kernel type is one of these things that I look at a lot. Because direct light is usually faster, and but the results are not as good. So usually you want to change to path tracing or PMC. In this direction, they're like getting slower and slower and more accurate and more accurate. So PMC is the slowest and the most accurate, I guess, and path tracing is the one that is kind of, I feel like the happy medium, the one I use the most. And you can see already how different the quality is and how it looks honestly much better. And well, also is getting slower. So already can see that the light quality is very different. And you can also see how much less light the fog actually lets through. And now actually the medium radius does make a difference in this setting. So you can see how the quality between higher density and lower medium radius versus lower density and higher medium radius does make it look very different. So you can see this is the quality of the light, the quality of the fog is different. Quality not in like one is better than the other, but how the feel of the fog is. You can see we're very quickly getting into a very dark territory here, but which of course is cool. And now we're getting really dark. So this looks again completely different. And now this is really, really thick. Now another thing we can do is activate adaptive sampling. That usually speeds things up a bit. Because it will kind of figure out where it needs more samples to clear up the image. Another setting I would recommend you is to change the GI clamp to something like 0.8 or 1. That can get rid of a lot of fireflies, these little white dots you see flying around. And I don't usually do more. If you want a clearer image in the viewport, then you can check the max preview samples and can up those. and the max samples are the ones that it uses for the render. The output settings are the same as with Blender itself. Now, of course, the camera is the same as with... Have I been in the camera the entire time? No, I haven't. So the camera settings are exactly the same as from that we're used to from Blender. So there's nothing really different, even though we have some additional Octane tools that I will get to in a second. But so this is the environment, and I think there's an option to plug in like an emission in this. So let's make this a bit darker. And see what the emission does. Yeah, it completely blows it out. So if we add like an RGB texture into the black body emission and make this a different color, it should give us some sort of option. Yeah, so if we really turn down the power here to, like, again, a range that is crazy low, we'll have some additional choice over kind of brightening up our fog, even if it's very dense fog. So if you turn this off, if we make it really dark, but if we now plug in the emission, come on, plug. You can kind of see we get dense fog, but it's still quite bright. So this is a way to have this kind of like a fog where you kind of feel like there's like light coming through. And of course, talking about lights, something I have totally forgotten about. So it can't really you can't really use these the usual lights. You get these two things here in the bottom, the mesh and the sphere. So of course, on the one hand, you can take this thing here. I'm gonna ignore the texture on there. I'm just gonna make a nice light out of it. So let's quickly go there. So we're in the material for our image as planes thing, but we don't really want that. We want to have an emission. So we can, on the one hand, build our lights like this, and then we have control over it this way. Or we can really pump it up. You can see how the environment interacts with the light. You can plug in again an RGB texture, a spectrum texture in here to blow everything out. So we have a very interesting light here that really interacts nicely with our fog here. Can make it a bit harder. Okay, and then we also have another option to use lights with the image. The Shift A light, and then, for example, add a sphere. So we have another light here, and then we actually have some light controls, but actually it will just tell us use nodes. You fool. And where are the nodes? The nodes are here, and then you will kind of see that what I'm suspecting is that this is just a sphere, like a sphere model, and then you have a control over the radius to see how big you want to make it, and then you have the usual kind of actually a diffuse material with an emission here. So we can basically do the same, say RGB, and plug that in here and make this a lovely green. It's a bit much. I usually check on surface brightness so it's not like so blown out. And then you can see that we're having some really lovely lights here. And of course it's slow because we have like a crazy amount of fog in here. So if I take this off, you won't see anything because it's too bright. Let's turn down the power to something very low and or totally off. And then you can see what's going on here. We have our lights in here, and what happens if we plug this one in? Yeah, you see, then we're looking like this. Again, this is, I think, in path tracing mode right now. Let's see, you can maybe see the difference in, yeah, look at how different this looks. So usually for texturing and building shaders and that kind of stuff, I usually stay with direct lighting because it's faster. But then once I really get into the whole lighting and world settings and everything, then I check to path tracing. What does PMC do? Looks similar. Does looks similar but is slower. Again, find the happy medium. Maybe if you have like 10 graphics cards, then it doesn't matter which one you choose. But for all us regular folks, let's try to stay reasonable. So you can see that is already pretty quickly crunching through those numbers and giving us a fairly nice and clean image. So one thing I wanted to really talk about and show you guys is something that you not find in the render settings here, but you're actually going to find it here in the toolbar here, and that is the two things of the Octane camera imager and the post-processing. And I mean, honestly, for me, these two things make Octane worth it. Not that it's like fantastically special. Maybe like Redshift or whatever, or V-Ray also have that. But that really allows you to like push your images right out of Octane even a bit more. I mean, you could do what this does also, I think, in like After Effects or Photoshop. But I think for me, there's a difference in seeing different kind of post-processing effects, film emulations, and these kind of things directly in the render. Rather than applying them later on, because I feel like it makes me notice different things and lets me explore different kind of ideas right in the engine. And that leads me in the end to make different kinds of design decisions that I would not otherwise get to. Let me get rid of this green sphere here. That's really annoying. This one looks super even better. Nothingness. Crazy cubes. Let's get rid of the cubes as well. I don't want them. So let's have a quick look at what each of these does. So first of all, let's look quick look at the post-processing, since that kind of has less options. So we'll click the override, and then you have a couple of things, and the ones I usually play with are the bloom power. So let's up the bloom, because bloom is great. Now this can be very easily super overdone, and you have to be very careful about that, because if you put bloom on everything, then it's crazy cheesy. It's like a lens flare. Talking about lens flares, we can even like add these like crazy lens flares. Oh yeah, I mean, maybe that's a bit too much, but usually I take the glare count down to 1 and the glare angle to 90%, and oh my goodness, you have crazy kind of lens flares, J.J. Abrams territory. Again, like, be very, very subtle. We can blur these out, so you can kind of don't see them. You have them a little bit, but again, be very, very, very gentle with these, right? You don't want to overdo it. Just a hint at some aberration or whatever, lens refraction or whatever virtual lens we have. So let's also look at the imager. and click the override, and you can see there's something happening. So there's a lot of stuff in here, and basically what it allows you to do is it has some like camera controls, more or less, not the actual control over the aperture and that kind of stuff, which we will get to in a second, but kind of the exposure, the gamma, the vignetting, so you can see that we can add additional vignetting on top of it. Maybe that is something you want to do only very subtly and add more later in Photoshop. You also have saturation and these kind of things. I don't honestly use a lot of that stuff. There's denoising. I think it just does the denoising at the end. Yeah, it says denoising on completion. So what happens if denoising volumes is like super difficult. I will not get into this right now. This is more for the other settings, the film emulation mostly. So the order we can leave, but then here the response. Sorry, I turned it off. The response is quite interesting. So usually, what you can do is that let's see. There's a variety of profiles based on film stock, on actual film stock. So if you change these, you can see how you get a very different feel out of it. These Futura ones, and I mean, you can see that they're really based on also the speed, which is the ISO level in the back here. You will get again a different feel to it, and it's always interesting to figure out what could be working best for any particular scene. Again, there's no like, okay, this is the best film emulation ever. It is really like, look at this. I mean, it really depends on what you want to achieve, and what basically your what you have gathered through your reference. I mean, this is quite crazy. We can up the exposure and use a particular kind of film stock to get really crazy results. But again, for me, this sits somewhere in between. Maybe you need to emulate a certain kind of feel for a client, or it's just a personal choice. But it also allows you like an incredible amount of control. Like you can up the exposure twice and get this crazy film stock emulation with these lights blowing out like crazy. So I think that's a very interesting way to go about looking at this. And there's still a bit of grain and hot pixels or whatever, but for me that adds to the flair of it. And I would not make this choice of having this image like this if I didn't have this a tool available in Octane or in my 3D package. So maybe I'm happy with this, or maybe I want to go black and white. So there's some black and white film stock. I don't think it was this one. Where is it? Was it this one? I think you need to set the saturation. There was some actual black and white film stock. This one also looks really cool. Like you get these crazy effects. These look really cool. And you can always find that happy medium between like your exposure and the response. So another thing. So again, for me it's a creative tool, right? I'm not looking for often not for any kind of particular film stock. I just play around and try to get that happy balance that really helps to emphasize the image, right? Of course, if it's all like glares and flares, then the image has no substance. It doesn't really help to make your image better, right? But if you're looking for that last little push, it's really helpful, I think. It's one of my favorite tools. Okay, let's look at the camera settings in itself. So we have the camera here, and you see that there's also something called the Octane camera settings, and we can also play around a little bit with that. So we have a distortion slider, which I also love, and you can see how we actually are playing around with the camera, kind of this barrel distortion of the camera. It can be a great tool to get rid of the very, like, everything is straight lines in 3D, and it's really annoying. I wouldn't use it like to this degree unless you're using, like, you have to use these kind of settings kind of in tandem with what you know about cameras. So like I don't know, 150, 200 millimeter lens is not going to have this kind of distortion. It's just not going to happen. So you have to be kind of understand a little bit when that distortion happens. So you're probably going to see this distortion more when you have a very wide angle, like a very cheap wide angle lens, and you want to go for that. I mean, if you make it too strong, then it doesn't look good either. But if you want to use this to kind of break the straight lines a little bit, this can have a great effect. So you can see that we're getting closer to camera and we're actually getting more distortion, which is kind of, for a wide angle lens, not that uncommon. And it kind of helps to break the sterility a little bit. Another thing is that we can use depth of field, and for that you want to activate the f-stop, and you maybe want to focus on this guy. So you can take the eyedropper tool and click on him. Of course, you want to get rid of autofocus. And then we need to play with the f-stop. So the f-stop determines how wide open the aperture is. Low number means the aperture is very wide open, which produces a very low depth of field, the area where something appears sharp on the surface of the sensor. I mean, it's all emulation here because there's no sensor, there's no camera. But that's basically what we're going for here, right? So we need to use a very, very low aperture to get the kind of out of focus effect that we want. And why is it not working? Why the aperture of 1 should really give us what we're looking for? But again, it's an emulation, so maybe do we need to go lower? Okay, for some reason, is it working? I think it's working. But why do I have to go so low? Oh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Here, sorry. Accidentally clicked on the wrong. Oh, can't go lower than 0.5, which is a shame. Let's try to play around with this a little bit. Okay, now we can see that. Okay, it's a bit tricky to get this exact effect when you have a wide angle lens. You can see also how the outline here is now still on the character, but because we added a distortion on top of it, you can see how the final image is distorted on top of the actual 3D. So let me go back here and play with it. So you need to see that we actually have to bring the character a lot closer to camera. Sorry, that was my fault. In order to the camera is focusing on him, so we now get a very nice depth of field, and you can see how the background is really blurred out, and we have this handsome scan model here standing there. Once you add once you go into the camera settings and you go for something like an 85, and the camera is still focused on him. Sorry, going wild here. We're getting really now a really blurred out background. Maybe you need to find again what's the best one, because too much depth of field makes everything blurry and not so nice. So you need to find that medium between getting that background separation of your character and also have the background still readable as what you want it to read like, right? So there needs to be a happy medium. So another thing which I like to do is the aperture aspect, which kind of can emulate an anamorphic lens, and anamorphic lenses have this very typical oval bokeh. Bokeh is the roundness of the blurriness of the lights in the background, and it's basically a reflection of the opening of the aperture, and anamorphic lenses have an oval aperture. So that's maybe like a film look that you want to emulate, because a lot in Hollywood they're using a lot of anamorphic lenses. So again, it's a cheesy thing. I like it a lot. Who doesn't like cheesy things? So you can play even more with the, let's see what we have, the glare blur. J.J. Abrams is really still here. Another thing is, right, the actual anamorphic lenses have usually a very bluish kind of streak, but of course we don't have that here. But well, it depends how much you really want to push it. You can do that in post. So these are kind of some of the lenses and choices and settings I use. I mean, you get this really super nice blooming around the character. That really looks cool. And the thing is, yes, you can get this in Cycles probably, and with post processing and all these kind of things, but it again, the question would be, would you make the same kind of choices based on doing it later in post? I mean, for me, that's always the question. And I think having this inside Octane, inside the 3D design process, makes me make different kind of design decisions and hopefully usually better design decisions. So I really don't mind the extra work it takes to make these shaders, because in the end it's time I save in the post-processing workflow, and again it lets me make different kind of decisions. So I mean, that's again, is it something that really is useful to you? I don't know. That you have to decide on a personal basis. I mean, Octane is free, right? So it's interesting to learn, and as you can see, it has loads and loads and loads and loads of other kind of settings, and you can go way deeper into it. And that's the beauty of it. So there's a lot more to learn. Another quick thing I wanted to mention is, of course, the passes. So in the same way that you would have your passes available for you to choose in Eevee or Cycles, you go here to the layer properties, and you click on passes, and then you have a lot of different ones. And the usual ones I use are, of course, the info channel. So you have the Z depth and you have the material ID, and it's basically the same ones that I use from Cycles. So we can actually preview all of them. So the material ID looks like this, and then the preview for the Z depth looks like this. Great. So you can change the Z depth settings here to get exactly the kind of value range that you want. Okay, so we've been through pretty much all the things I usually use, and definitely we've been through all the techniques that and all the tools that I'm using for creating these images. So I'm not going through building this entire scene. I've covered building environments in many videos before, and again, this is a video about Octane, not about building an environment. So nevertheless, I want to show you exactly how I put this together with all the details and all the shaders. So as you can see here, it's a puzzle of a variety of different things that I have all shown before in my videos. So part of it is modeled, so you can see that this is very simple geometry. The streets is like a couple of polygons, and as far as I built this myself, you can take this apart and take a look at how I put it together, but it's really not that complicated. So as you can see here, I modeled the railing for the bridge as well. Again, it's just a very simple geometry with some beveled edges. Oh, why is this not working? Okay. So there's really nothing fancy about this. It's just pure geometry, and then I pulled it up in a little bit in the middle with the proportional editing tools. Now, some of these, of course, I have my usual 3D scan models in there that I use pretty much all the time, maybe overuse it. There are pieces of mega scans in there. So these kind of modular sidewalks, you can see here, I mean, it is really the most basic of texture setups. I didn't do anything fancy here. I used the curbs from Megascans. You can see how the scene setup generally is structured. So I had an image in mind that I really wanted to do, and I looked at my reference and tried to emulate that scene, and then I kind of it was kind of a shot like this. Let me switch to the camera. Yeah, exactly. So it was this shot, and I had the character in a different location. So you can see the framing for the camera. So this is kind of the shot I had in mind. And I tried to emulate that a little bit as best I could. And then I went from there to make a variety of other shots based on my camera tools. So to just further break it down, so I have a bit of street here where the plane is a bit more subdivided to allow for some local adjustment here, the closer we are to the camera. I purchased some Japanese traffic light from Sketchfab, and also I went shopping a bit on Sketchfab. Honestly, I also got this. This is actually a British kind of old school street lamp, but based on the location in Tokyo where I modeled the bridge after, they also have these really old school ornamental kind of lampposts. And while they are really not the same, I kind of wanted to get that feature in there to have kind of this opposing element, and also to have these really warm street lights in comparison to the overall more like cooler atmosphere. So I put these in here, and then I also modeled the bridge itself. So the pillars are, of course, there's nothing special. It's just very, very simple. Let me zoom in. Very simple geometry. Everybody knows how to do this. And then the bridge was kind of interesting. Again, I modeled a piece of it, and then build an array and a curve along which to bend it, and then I just added another level on top of it that goes in a slightly different direction. Again, very, very basic modeling here, nothing special. The thing is included in the file for you to check out. Here I made like a little sign that I took from a Google Maps photo, I think, to have the name of the bridge in here. You will see that in a second when I switch to rendered mode. Yeah, I purchased also these guys here, and you never see them in full. You only kind of see the bottom of it, so maybe it's a bit of a waste, but it's fine. I started the scene actually with blocking out with these big blocks here to see exactly where my big volumes need to stand, and then I could start blocking out the camera a bit better and replace them finally with some facades. So again, I'm a big fan of using whatever tools there are best available, and combining all of these, not sticking to any one method in particular, but rather use whatever is most efficient and gets you to the result the fastest. So one of the issues, of course, was going to be the buildings, the facades. So of course you can start building everything by hand. I don't know, use image mapping or whatever. But honestly, for this task, that wasn't going to happen, because this tutorial is not about building a facade of a building. Maybe that can be something for a later tutorial. But for these, I actually took photo scans that some people did. So the same way that there are photo scans of people, people are walking around and taking photogrammetry scans of entire buildings and facades, and that's really amazing, because you get down to a level of detail that you could never model that. And it's really messy in parts, and there's like holes in it, but it doesn't really matter, because on the level of on eye level, it's usually the quality is the greatest, because that's where you stand with your camera, and oftentimes you don't notice it, or it's like in the background, or it's not like the focus of the image. And you can see here like how you have just an insane amount of organic looking detail. But I mean, you see there's a hole in there where this awning is, and I also, sorry, I'm zipping around here. I had to here build a part of an awning because it had a big hole in it, and so these are just OBJ files with one texture that I just then plug into the specularity and roughness as well, and adjust the color a little bit. Some of them have normal maps, even depending on where you get it from and how good the quality is. I found this really fantastic source on Sketchfab for all these scans and purchased them. And then to augment them here and there, because they are cut off, they are completely cut off above a certain level, because you can't, even with like shooting up, you can't scan all of these. I just added very simple geometry on top. I mean, this is literally a couple of boxes, an array, and stack on top. But for the shot I was using it for, it perfectly blended, I think, in together. And I mean, to a certain degree, it doesn't make sense here because these are too close together. But for the shot itself, I think it's good enough. So, and yeah, the last bit is actually that you see a lot of these stacked against each other. These are all just images planes, images plugged in on a plane with an emission. So it's basically like backdrops that are in position in certain elements, in certain areas, so as to fake like the wider city in the background. And a lot of times these are just blurred out, so you can't really tell that they're there. But nevertheless, they are. So, and then, yeah, just go around with the camera and take a lot of nice snapshots. So, you can see, it's like basically walking around with your camera. Since we're not allowed to travel, I kind of had to travel in my computer and go around and take some nice shots. Whatever I felt like made sense. So this one actually I took a close-up of this building, and it worked surprisingly well. There's still some tiny little things you need to fix in Photoshop, but close up. And here the background is all blurred out. For that I need to enable the different lady here. Okay. So, but let's turn on Octane and let's see how this looks and what decisions I made for this scene in terms of visuals. So let's turn it on. Let's hope it doesn't break. Okay, so here we are. I already activated it once and reactivated it so it loads faster. So we can navigate a bit around here. It's of course a bit heavier, but you can kind of see here. So these guys are just backplates, just photographs that are in the background. So once we're in camera, and these are a bit blurry, I'll turn off the ones I don't need. It becomes indistinguishable, honestly. Here actually it's the same. Like if you take this off here, you can see the top here, the other geometry. But I just took this and stretched it vertically as to match the perspective and moved a little bit in the back. And you can see the continuity between the building, but you can't tell that it's two separate images. So looking at, the camera is probably the most thing that stands out the most. So you can see that it's a 50mm lens using f-stop 1.8, focusing on the lady with a anamorphic aperture. So if you want to do anamorphic, you should always use the aspect ratio 2.39 to 1, because that's traditionally the aspect ratio a square image will be stretched to. So if you want to read more about this whole anamorphic thing, then you can definitely do that on the internet. So you can see how I upped the preview samples to 500, so I get a cleaner image while still working on it. And also I upped the max samples to 2000 samples in the final render. But so you can see in it, oh my goodness, it's a bit laggy. So I have two 2080 Ti currently running, and you can see how you can really quickly load your scene full of stuff and it becomes a bit slow. So you can see here I have a very reflective boardwalk and some wetness on the ground. It doesn't look that fantastic if you look at it like this, but in camera you can't tell that much. I was mostly concerned with making the breakup of the texture nice in front of the camera and not so much in the back. You can see a little bit the HDRI I have. So you can see, of course, the scale doesn't match, but this is kind of what I use for basic the basic lighting information. And I mean, you're never going to see it as a backplate anywhere, so it doesn't really matter. Here's some of the Megascan assets. Again, they're kind of just like there's details here and there. They're not really the focus. What do we have with the traffic light here? It came with a UV map, but it's a very basic shader with just like some metallic and roughness information. And I also have added just a red and green light with a very basic emission. The characters, of course, self-explanatory. You see, I still have these boxes in here. I haven't even used it. I should really take it out. So one thing I did with the surfaces of these buildings, I put a light here so I get this nice reflection in camera without seeing the light. So one thing I did with these textures is that I set them to not, like I set them to shade smooth, shade flat, and also turned on the auto smooth, just to have not any weird kind of, like the reflection and everything is basically proper. So also what I did for these is that for these textures here, I had to adjust them a little bit and color correct them a little bit, like took the saturation down, took the brightness down, and also added the same texture to the specularity and roughness, just to have a little bit of extra information and how it interacts with the light. These guys are very simple metal. It's just one dirt map into the roughness and then a gray color added to it. So nothing fancy. These are all I took basically the saturation down a little bit over the regular kind of texture that was included, just so it gels a bit better, because all these colors were kind of fighting for attention, and that was not so nice. You can also see here that for the camera I added camera distortion of 1 just to get a bit of a more natural aspect to it. And let's see what else. There were some errors here which I like, some stuff I could have fixed. Like you can see a little bit of a I don't know, from the model floating in the air. I just erased that in Photoshop later. Could have also deleted it here. Let's look at these guys here. So these are, I haven't even adjusted anything. There was a texture in the Sketchfab model which I used, but then it also has I put like some spheres in for the lights and added a texture emission, so that worked quite well as well. And here the simplest of all geometries, it is these blocks here. I took 2 blocks and made them different widths and added and made an array just to have this like 2-tier, and I made them quite reflective, so that once the lights hit here, you kind of get this streak of reflections, but that are kind of interrupted by some kind of other surface. But again, it's super rough and super basic, but at this angle here, it's kind of hidden and integrated between the other stuff, and it doesn't really, it blends, I think, into the background. I mean, here we can see some little artifacts from the low geometry of the photo scan, but again, this is easily fixed in Photoshop. I have I think I have the same kind of simple geometry up here. Yeah, you can see it's just a block on top of here, because otherwise it would have been cut off. And yeah, and then if you look at it, if you look at our settings here in the imager, I chose a Futura 2400, quite a bit of vignetting, and I have the post-processing here. Should we add some more glare to it? How would this look like? Jesus, look at that. That is really too much. Super crazy J.J. Abrams mode. Maybe not. A little bit is fine. A little bit is fine. So let's have a quick look at the other ones. I always played with a little bit of here depth of field. So here you're not going to see it as pronounced. This is mostly in the foreground. And here I have different images. I just kind of use the same image and put it there. And sometimes I need to fix the perspective and how it exactly sits in there and add a little bit of blur, because of course this is supposed to be blurrier, but it sits right there to cover up the other geometry. So I have to paint less in Photoshop. But that just, it is what it is. If we flick through the rest, I just try to find like nice compositions, nice simple compositions to show off maybe some of the bridge. And to always have a character in there for scale. I felt like if I would have only stuck with the first image here, then I modeled this bridge for so long for no point. But so I tried to add some bridge shots. So here I chose to make a shot of this restaurant scan and kind of mix it with like some of the assets I bought on Sketchfab, the characters and the building itself and the other building behind it, and my bridge asset, the background drop, and a kind of a depth of field here, to arrive at something quite organic that kind of works well together. You can see some errors here and there, but those are, quickly, either you can fix the geometry or you can just paint it over. I painted over for this one. And here, there's the wrong lady there. I need to change that. So here I really went like full blur here. So if you look at the camera settings again, you can see that I actually used a 135. It's quite a long lens, and even at a f4.0, you get this really lovely blurred out background. Here you can really notice the oval bokeh, and again, you need to find that balance based on the shot, which looks nice in terms of background separation, and also still have some of the background readable, right? If the bokeh is too much, then it just becomes like it's like this, I don't know, blah, whatever in the background, and you can't really tell what's going on. And honestly, a bokeh of f-stop of 1.0 is pretty much impossible, or like the lens at that f-stop would not be very sharp. So you should probably not go below 2.8, or maybe for this one f4 worked a lot better. The f-stop number the blurriness will increase dramatically if you use a longer lens. At 20 millimeters, a f4 there's gonna be almost everything in focus. Again, that's a topic for a different time. But so basically that's what I did for this scene. Was there one more shot? I think there was one more. Yeah, just kind of like an alternate shot for this. So here we are just with the final images, a final word, so to speak. So I rendered all of these guys out, and I think I mentioned I painted out some stuff. I basically brought in the Z depth pass to get a bit of depth separation, adjusted it a little bit, got rid of the distracting bits, and just painted over a little bit just to make it a bit more clear. I added some reflections where I didn't have any. And alter the material pass here. And I did that for all the images. I think this one had a bit too much noise up there, so I cleaned it up a little bit. Yeah. Corrected the background a little bit and made it a bit blurrier. You see how I changed that. I basically still did that I still tried to bring that image in because it has all this glowing stuff in here, which is more difficult and more time consuming to replicate in Photoshop. And yeah, fixed some of the weird geometry here. Here was nothing to fix, of course. I mean, the one thing with using these images and kind of post-processing tools is, of course, that it's getting very difficult to fix anything in Photoshop because, I mean, you really have to be very subtle and very careful with all the photos you add, and the photo bash on top if necessary, or painting out stuff. You can basically not paint with a paintbrush anymore. You have to kind of paint with a clone tool to retain that same quality of the image. I mean, here there's really nothing you can really do anymore. I added some hair, some like stray hairs for the lady, because otherwise it looked too much like a 3D scan. Here's a bit of noise. I probably should have let that render a bit longer, but it is what it is. So as a final step, I did some color grading. That is really up to you. So, I mean, if we compare it... Where's the image? Can't even find my own stuff anymore. I mean, I didn't really do much. Most of it was done really in Octane. I didn't change the image. Oh, that is the wrong actually. Wait. I didn't change much anymore in the grade. But you can see here side by side. Maybe I should have spent more time on the grade, but it is really minor adjustment. But yeah, so basically that's what it is, and that's what concludes this introduction to Octane, really. Again, this is a very basic overview just to get you guys started. There's a lot more to this plugin. So again, who is this for? Is this the best render engine ever made? Of course, it's not the best ever made. And hopefully there will be even better ones in the future. Hopefully Octane will improve all the little things that are not working. But I think it represents an interesting alternative to Octane, to Cycles and Eevee. I mean, yes, it does not have the real-time aspect. It doesn't have the deep integration with everything like Cycles has in Blender, of course, because I mean that's the native render engine, right? But also, I mean, it looks worlds better than Eevee, and I think it also looks a lot better with than Cycles with I feel like the same, or actually less effort involved. It looks better than Cycles to me. Maybe you are of a different opinion. That's cool. Just for what I like to do, I feel like the tools like the the quality of the light, the post-processing tools, and all these kind of things, they do look a lot better to my eyes, at least. And again, it's about what the software allows me to do, the kind of design decisions that it allows me to do. And I feel like if I just compare the amount of time I put in and what comes out of it, for these kind of final images, Octane does feel like it represents quite a step up, to be honest. But again, it's not all fantastic, right? It is a bit cumbersome to change your materials and to adjust things, and maybe something crashes, or even the fact that it's not just a simple plugin, but you have to run a server, and you have to download a special build of Blender, and you have to wait for updates. Like the 2.9 version for Octane Blender is not out yet. So there are all these drawbacks, of course. So in the end, you have to kind of decide if for yourself, like, this is the right tool for the job. I mean, honestly, I use both. I use Octane, and I use Cycles, and I use Eevee, all at the same time. And I kind of weigh my options as to when each tool is the best one for the job. And I think that's the best way for me to approach about whether or not to go with this, right? So I hope this was useful, and I'm looking forward to your comments and suggestions for this video and future videos. So thanks again for listening to this one, and looking forward to what you guys do with it.